Peace family, Will Roundtree here, your credit master, and today lesson 1 is credit philosophies. But today's objective is for students to learn the history of credit and how it is established and the importance in today's society. And when it comes to, credit philosophies, we want to talk about, first of all, what is credit? And credit ultimately is the ability to make payments on time over time. And with that being said, just to kind of share my journey and for you to understand, how I even come to understanding the philosophy of credit personally, more than a few years back. But I had a mentor who once taught me and said that, Will, eventually credit is going to become the new dollar, learning a new philosophy of credit. And at the time, I really didn't understand what he meant by that. But, being from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, moving to Las Vegas, Nevada in 2005, that was right around the time my mentor had told me about, understanding and having different mindset in dealing with credit. And so when I moved to Las Vegas, I quickly found out why credit was important. Couldn't buy a car, having good credit, couldn't rent an apartment. I mean, my credit was so bad, if I would have went to the library to rent a book and they would have ran my credit, I probably would have got kicked out that library. And so with all of that being said, I knew something that I had to change about that mindset or that philosophy about credit. Because, of course, I wasn't taught about credit growing up. And so what I did was I set out to pretty much learn as much as I could to understand why I was being denied for these things. I was 26 years old, calling my parents, asking for them to co-sign for a vehicle for me. And so I just felt I had to change that situation. So I set out on a journey to learn as much as I can about credit. So, this was back during the time when, they had internet cafes. I would literally go to the internet cafe every single day to research and go online to get more information about credit. I didn't have the internet at home because I couldn't afford the internet, so I did the things that I had to do to be able to go out there and get the information. And so going to the internet cafes, going to, the library, I can remember I was able to finally get a copy of my own personal credit report because one of the dealerships that I went to where they pulled my credit was, gracious enough to give me a copy of my credit report. Really didn't understand how to read it, but he kind of broke it down and said, you know what, Will, you haven't been paying your bills on time. You have a few accounts that went delinquent. And so because I didn't make my payments on time over time, I truly didn't understand what credit was at that time. And so from that point, I said, you know what, I need to change this situation. So not only did I go out there and educate myself about credit, not only did I go out there and become more responsible with my credit, I was able to increase my credit score over time to be able to be in position to do the things that I needed to do, whether it was buy a house, buy a car, et cetera, et cetera. So speaking from my own personal journey, my own personal experiences, I'm going to share with you not only the credit philosophies, why credit is so important, but also the mindset I had to have in dealing with credit, the mindset I had to have in understanding credit. We have not been taught that credit is one of those things that is going to follow you pretty much the rest of your life. See, a lot of us don't understand that a credit score or our credit ranges anywhere from 350 to 850 points. And so not knowing that, what the minimum credit score is needed in order for you to be able to qualify for things. I mean, most places you want to have a minimum of 680, which is still considered average. And so understanding, because we have been boozled and not being taught about credit, think about it like this. Credit is not taught pretty much in most educational institutions. We're not taught about credit in school. We're not taught about credit in churches. We're not taught about credit in the gyms or on the golf course. We don't even talk about it, especially in different adverse communities. Understanding, which is why credit all starts with, we need to change our mindset in dealing with credit. Why is that? Because credit ultimately determines directly and indirectly everything that we do within our lives. Think about it. I always say that, people say that money isn't everything, but then I come back and say, yeah, but it ranks right up there with oxygen. And that's the same thing I like to say with credit. Some people may think credit isn't everything, but it does rank right up there with oxygen. Think about it. Credit can literally lubricate your life a little bit differently. Your lifestyle, understanding that without credit, there's a lot of different things you cannot do. Because credit can also indirectly impact your livelihood, indirectly impact your family, Did you know that auto insurance companies generally hike up your insurance premiums when you don't have good credit? And that is because they feel that people who have low or challenged credit scores are more prone to filing bogus insurance claims. Think about that. So if your insurance premiums are high, it could be a direct reflection of your credit score. Remember that range. So even understanding that, but then we go back into how did we get into that situation? That's because we didn't know what credit was. Understanding not making your payments on time over time could potentially put you in a situation to where your insurance rates are hiked. Understanding that your lack of credit can also determine the school zone your kids go to school in. Think about it. Generally, when you don't have good credit, you have to live in sometimes undesirable or unpleasant neighborhoods, which hence have schools that are zoned in those areas, which could potentially be undesirable or unpleasant. Or you're paying 2 to 3 times for your rent than it would be for you to be able to actually own a home in a much more desirable neighborhood. Did you know that the typical rent in some major metropolitan areas, you're paying anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for rent? For what you're normally getting in that potential, scope of rent payments, you could have a mortgage payment anywhere from $7,000 to $1,000. So think about that. By not having good credit, you are going to pay much more to not own something. Think about in some of the neighborhoods that we would deem to be, less desirable, you see more rent stores, rent to own stores. Imagine having to rent your furniture where you're paying, $50 a week for over the course of 3 years, when you could have just went and bought that same couch or comforter and love set for $1,000. So understand, having bad credit is expensive because you're going to pay 2 to 3 times more. As we talked about, having to rent your furniture, having to rent an apartment when you could own that place, having to pay more on your auto insurance rates. By having the wrong mindset about credit, we do ourselves and our families and our loved ones a disservice. Imagine not being able to get your child those braces. Imagine not being able to rent that instrument for your child because he or she is in a band. That's right. Did you know a lot of places where they sell trumpets and trombones and musical equipment, musical instruments, they run your credit score now. I can remember when I was in the 6th grade, I played the trumpet. I actually got pretty good at it, by the way. But more importantly, that I can remember my parents, my mother, had to have her credit ran because they want to make sure they get their equipment, their instrument back at the end of the term. So understanding, by not having the right mindset about credit, by not understanding what credit is, by not even knowing the basics of it and understanding what the credit score range is, your FICO score, which essentially is a 3-digit number that is calculated based off of an algorithm of how well you pay your payments on time, over time. And we're going to dive in a little bit more of what actually makes up a credit score. But while we're going into what credit is, I want to talk about, the mindset, the pitfalls, of having the wrong mindset about credit, how that could also impact you. Again, for one, you're going to pay more in interest when you don't have good credit or when you don't understand credit. What is interest? Interest essentially is whenever you're going out to borrow money, you have to pay a premium for that money that you are going to borrow. So let's say you want to borrow something as simple as $10,000. They're going to charge you an interest on this particular money. And so because you don't have the right mindset, as opposed to paying 3% interest on that $10,000 over time, you potentially would have to pay 10% interest. Now, you may say, well, how does that affect me? Well, think about it. By not understanding how credit works, by having the wrong mindset about credit, imagine going out there to purchase your first auto loan. Okay? You're freshly out of college, or you're still in college, or whatever your situation is. You go out and purchase an auto loan. Now, a typical credit score for being able to purchase an auto loan, you're going to be, or first, let's start here. You can be financed and approved for an auto loan with a 500 credit score. And a 500 credit score is actually, is not good, I should say. You can pay as much as 29% on that particular auto loan. And so because you understand credit differently, because you've had a different mindset about credit, by having a 680 or better, that 29% can drop down as low as 5 to 7%. And then by being in the 700s, 720 plus or better of a credit score, you put yourself in a position to be at 1.9 or even 0% interest to 3.7%. So when you understand why you want to have good credit, it puts you in a different position, not even just when it comes to auto loans, but everything. Same thing when you're going to purchase a home, you want to purchase a mortgage. Imagine purchasing a home could be the difference in you being able to finance it through a traditional lender or you having to look at a rent-to-own situation. Let's take a look and see what that looks like. So let's say you find a property that's only $100,000 where you can go through an FHA scenario and only have to put down 3.5%. Whereas if you decide to go and do a lease to own option because maybe you're working on your credit, you have a subpar credit score, you may have to put down as much as 20 to 25%, which means $20,000 to $25,000. So again, by not having the right mindset about credit, having bad credit is expensive. And so when we understand that it all starts with the mindset, we understand that having a paradigm shift about how we think and view credit. See, because we haven't been taught and understood credit, again, we've put ourselves in a point of detriment. And how is that? One is because, like I say, it becomes that much more expensive. But then two, I feel that we've given ourselves an unfair advantage in the marketplace. Imagine, you want to become a business owner. How are you going to get that building if you have bad credit? How are you going to purchase or lease those company vans? How are you going to be able to get access to inventory? Understanding that because of our lack of information, because of the lack of the mindset that we have, and understanding that credit is really just a tool. Credit is really a lifeline. I always like to say that credit is the lifeline to our livelihoods, or even to my business owners, your credit is the bloodline to your business. Because without having great credit, it makes life that much more difficult. But first, we have to also understand what is credit. Why is credit so important? Changing our philosophy. See, my parents were not taught about credit, so it did them a disservice. I love them dearly, but it did them a disservice because they couldn't pass that information down to me. My parents' parents did not know or understand anything about credit. They didn't have the right mindset. They didn't have the philosophies to be able to pass down. And of course, within our household, within our culture, it's a direct reflection of, the lack of things we had not been taught. Did you know in some cultures that credit is taught to children as young as the age of 10 before they can even go out there and start credit? But in some cultures, understanding, going back to the pitfalls of not understanding why credit is so important, people putting their children in position to where they're ruining their credit at the age of 10, putting things in their name, cell phones, utility bills, those different things. So yes, there are pitfalls when you don't have the proper mindset about credit, because think about it. What you don't know will and can hurt you. You may say, well, what do you mean by that? The lack of not knowing much about credit at a young age, by the time you go out and get in the real world, it will have adverse effects on you. You may say, well, how can that be? Think about it. Every step and walk of your life, you're going to need access to credit. When you're freshly out of high school, you're getting ready for college, what are some of the things you need to do? You got to have student loans. In order to get approved for a student loan, you got to have good credit. But if you don't have good credit, then what do? You have to settle for, a subpar student loan, potentially with a higher interest rate, hence affecting you the rest of your life. Because then when you have higher interest rates, and once you graduate and get out of school, you may have a job that does not equate to the amount of debt in order for you to be able to pay on the student loan debt. So then it continues to become a hamster wheel of a cycle. You're just attempting to rob Peter to pay Paul. You're robbing your paycheck to pay your student loans. So that's why you want to be in position to having access to good credit. So taking a deeper dive into credit mindset, the philosophies of credit, and really diving in of why you want to learn this information. And I kind of broke credit down as far as an acronym. And so let's take a deeper look into, what this would look like. So the first thing is you want to have and look at credit as, let me see what we have here. All right, so we want to look at credit as far as the credentials. Our credit is the credentials to our livelihood. Think about it. Anything that you do to achieve or get to a higher level, you want to have the proper credentials. What are your credentials in dealing with your credit? You want to purchase a house, you got to have the credentials, the credit credentials. You want to buy a car, you have to have the credit credentials. You want to get a business line of credit, you have to have the credit credentials. Those credentials opens up so many different doors for you. Having great credit can open up different doors that you could have never imagined. Imagine being able to walk into a dealership and not have to put a down payment down on a vehicle and pick the vehicle that you want instead of getting the vehicle that your credit affords you. Imagine being able to walk in any bank and get approved for the credit card with the lower interest rate. Imagine being able to apply for whatever it is you need to apply for, and you're always going to get the lowest interest rates. And so that is extremely important, in understanding that is because for those who understand what a credential is, it's almost just like your pass through life is going to be able to open up so many different doors for you. Next thing is responsibility, or being responsible with your credit. So if you're not responsible with your credit, what does that do for you? Again, goes into the pitfalls. What are some of those potential pitfalls? Bankruptcy, it's called, or BK. You could be sued civilly. You could, get a judgment against you. And so those things could have adverse effects on you when you don't take care of your credit responsibly, when you're not taught about credit responsible, when you're not making your payments on time over time. Again, going back to what is credit, the ability to make those payments on time and over time. And so because of our lack of information about credit, we then become adults and have a lack of responsibility when it does come to utilizing our credit and truly understanding credit. See, credit is really, again, just a lifeline. I'd rather have and need than to need and not have. Imagine being able to be in position or not being in position to bail a loved one out of jail because you don't have, the actual liquid cash. Tens of thousands of people who are sitting in jail right now because they couldn't afford bail. Now imagine being able to have that lifeline of credit because they were responsible, to be able to use their credit credentials to be able to pull that $1,500 off a credit card so that they can bail a loved one out. So again, we want to, make sure that we're being responsible with credit. Next is we want to educate ourselves about credit. Why is education about credit so important? Because you want to make sure that you know the ins and outs about credit. What makes up a credit score, which we'll go to in a later lesson. How to establish credit, which we're going to go through in a later lesson. So understanding that these are the philosophies of credit, the larger components of understanding credit, how it can be used in today's society. Imagine getting ready to go off to college and you are not able to rent your student housing because you don't have good credit, or you've ruined your credit before you've even graduated from college. And one of the reasons why you want to educate yourselves, especially for my college students, is imagine when you're getting ready to go to college, and we all have seen it before. You see the nicely furnished table out front with the free pizzas and a t-shirt that they offer you. So they entice you to come and apply for this credit card by giving you the free t-shirt, giving you a free pizza, or whatever the case that they do. And because banks have been more liberal or lax their underwriting guidelines for college students, they make it extremely easy for college students to be able to get a credit card. So imagine you're 18 years old, again, freshly in college, and you get a $3,500 credit card, okay? So you're on spring break, you haven't used your credit card yet, new Jordans come out, new whatever the latest and greatest sneaker has come out. You're in the mall, you don't have any actual cash on you, but you remember you have that plastic where they told you can use this for any and everything. Now, because of your lack of education, the lack of information we've been taught over time, you go purchase those sneakers, and that purchase is, let's just say, $200. Them not telling you that the introductory rate of the 0% interest is no longer null and void, and now you're at a 17% interest rate on that credit card, which is the typical interest rate. Now you have to pay more on that purchase, but because of your lack of education of understanding credit, you didn't make the payment. I've literally talked to college students who felt they didn't have to pay back towards their credit card until they actually graduated. So now you've become irresponsible with that credit card, hence impacting and affecting the entire rest of your life. Now, as you become an adult, your auto insurance rates are going to be 2 to 3 times higher because you forgot to pay on a $3,500 credit card in college. You potentially have to rent or lease to own option of a home. Not that there's anything wrong with those scenarios, but understand those options generally tend to be a bit more expensive. Now you're paying 29% on an automobile, which is a depreciating asset or a depreciating liability, I should say. You buy a vehicle at $35,000, and as soon as you drive it off the lot, you lose 20% of the value of it. So if you were to sell that vehicle the very next week, you couldn't even sell it for the original cost of what you paid for it. So again, by not having a proper education about credit, we do ourselves a disservice. All right, next. So we have credentials, responsibility, education. The next is going to be due diligence. Are we being diligent with our credit? Understanding that the lack of due diligence on our credit, again, is going to potentially put us in the credit pitfalls. We just briefly discussed and talked about how not diligently paying our bills on time, what those could be. Again, bankruptcy, potential judgments, being civilly sued by the creditor, So by not understanding these things, by not doing your due diligence, when you do get approved for that $3,500 credit card, finding out what my date of repayment is, If you don't make your payments on time, even though you may pay it, but you pay it late, then you will get what's called a late payment. Hence, again, affecting and negatively impacting your credit score. Again, going back to what is credit being the ability to make payments on time, over time. So yes, you may be making your payments, you may be doing your diligence in paying the bills, but if you're not paying them on time, meaning the due date of when the credit card bill is actually due, then yes, you still put yourself in a place of disservice. All right, so took up a little bit room on this one, so we'll go to the next page. All right, so breaking down again what is credit, you also want to have integrity. Meaning you're going to do what you say you're going to do, essentially without someone having to tell you, or when others are not looking, is also a part of credit. Essentially, credit is being given to you on the notion of a promise to pay. Think about it. The reason that credit was even introduced into our society was the ability and the means for people to be able to go out there and leverage their integrity, is really what it boils down to. That if I give you money to be able to finance this home, you're going to be integrous and make sure you pay us back over 30 years. If we give you access to be able to go and purchase that vehicle, you're going to be integrous enough to be able to pay back this vehicle over the 3 to 6 years, or however long your auto loan is, or your student loans, or whatever it is that you get financed for. Even if you personally borrow money from somebody, that essentially is a form of credit, because they're going to trust you in your integrity to be able to pay them back over whatever you guys had negotiated in terms for them to get their money back. So understand that credit is so much more than just to be able to go and buy a house, a car, or whatever it is you want to go and finance. Credit, again, it starts with a shift, a paradigm shift. Again, my parents didn't teach us about credit, so I had to be the one to go out there and create this paradigm within my family so that I can go back and teach them about credit. Now raising up my family, my kids, and teaching them about credit. So now I have broken the potential poverty cycle. See, a lack of credit education, a lack of credit information, and bad credit is a direct correlation of poverty. Did you know that? So understand, when you learn credit, you have exponentially increased your odds of creating wealth for your family. That's why I'm extremely passionate about credit. Hopefully you are, because again, leading to the last thing of what credit is, it's really just a tool. That's all. Think about your carpenter, or any carpenter or contractor. They can't build a house without tools. You know, they say you never want to build a home on a shaky foundation. Well, our credit is the foundation to our livelihoods. See, this course is all about learning your RBCs. No, not your ABCs, your RBCs. RBCs standing for real estate, business, and credit, which credit being the foundation of the other two. See, you can't get real estate without having good credit. You can't start a business and get access to business capital without having good credit. So credit is the barometer to everything that we do in our lives. And we just talked about that earlier in the lesson, your auto insurance rates. Did you know that life insurance companies are trying to figure out ways to tie our credit scores into being able to be approved for life insurance? Imagine how detrimental that could be to us as a community, as a household, and also knowing that credit being a tool, imagine being able to now properly send a loved one off on their homegoing for that burial. Maybe because not having life insurance, you put yourself at a disadvantage, but because understanding that credit can also be a lifeline and understand that life happens, now we're able to potentially use our credit to be able to use the line of credit that we've been able to get to be able to pay for a proper burial. So hopefully you guys have learned something in this lesson 1, understanding what is credit, understanding the credit philosophies, how the importance of understanding credit can impact us on our everyday walk of life in today's society, and overall that credit, i.e. just being a tool to our livelihood. So my name is Will Roundtree, and I'll see you guys in lesson 2.